Welcome to Ellis B. Feaster's Radio Air Check and Classic TV channel.
Ladies and gentlemen, Imus in the morning.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Let me, 6 minutes after the hour on WABC in New York and on various radio stations around the country and on RFD TV. Coming up this morning, we'll talk with the presidential historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and Senator John McCain, Senator Chris Dodd, and James Carville and Mary Matlin. And Deirdre Imus and we'll see what else comes up. I want to take a minute now to introduce this new incarnation of Imus in the morning and the cast. And then we'll get to one of the great voices in the history of rock and roll, Levon Helm. Please welcome from Springfield, Missouri, Charles McCord. From Long Island, New York, Rob Bartlett. From Plano, Texas, Kareth Foster. From Pekin, Illinois, Larry Kinney. Back in the studio at WABC from Queens, New York, Lou Rufino. From Brooklyn, New York, Tony Powell. And from the Bronx, Bernard McGirt. And now, y'all please welcome the great Levon Helm.
You make a day.
Von Helm. That's all right. And Amy and the great Larry Campbell, all of them. It's 13 after the hour. Hello?
Imus in the morning.
So I want to take a couple of minutes now to talk about what happened back on April 12th and what I think it means, what it means for this program, and what it means for the young women out at Rutgers. In thinking about what happened, as most of you know, I haven't talked to anyone and didn't see any point in going on some sort of Larry King tour to offer a bunch of lame excuses for making essentially a reprehensible remark about innocent people who did not deserve to be made fun of. I think what happened is about what should have happened. I think one has to realize, and I certainly do, that you don't get to decide, nor should you, how the news media is going to treat a remark you make of the kind of remark I made. You don't get to decide whether they're going to put it in context. You can't whine and complain. If you pick up the New York Times and in an essay about the wonderful, brilliant legal mind of Martin Garbus, read that what you said was a racist tirade. And every time I would start to get pissed off about that, I would remind myself that if I hadn't have said what I said, then we wouldn't be having this discussion, and I wouldn't have to deal with that. And the women at Rutgers wouldn't have to deal with it. So every time some event happened, or every time someone made some comment about what I had done or what I had said, I always remembered that it began with that remark. On April 12th, we did the show, and we were scheduled to meet with the team that night down at the governor's mansion in Princeton. No one knew that. So around 4 o'clock that afternoon, I got a call from Les Moonves at CBS, and he said, we can't take the pressure, and we're going to have to pull the plug. And I said, I understood that. And while I knew I wasn't still working for Mel Karmazin or Fareed Suleiman, Les Moonves could not have been more honorable and more straightforward and more decent and more honest in dealing with me. There was never at any point that he said, oh, everything's going to be fine or whatever. We understood the gravity of the remark. We understood the consequences for the young women at Rutgers, and we all recognized, and I certainly did, that it was just a matter of time before he did what he had to do. So the meeting with the team was, as I mentioned, at the governor's mansion in Princeton or somewhere. Well, it was Princeton. Not somewhere, that's where it is. So I started getting telephone calls because it was fairly big news that I had been fired, wondering if I was still going to show up, from a couple of people who were involved in the meeting. Well, we were already on our way. And when we had a decoy car so nobody could follow us because nobody was supposed to know about the meeting. We pull up at the governor's estate there, and there's all kinds of news media. And I'm thinking, how did they? It turns out they were there because Governor Corzine had been involved in this horrible accident, so we didn't know any of that. We met with the team, Deirdre and I, for about 4 hours. And I had said earlier in the week and apologizing that I was a good person who had said a bad thing. And I thought about how irrelevant that was. Because whether you're a good person or not is completely unrelated. Doesn't give you a license to make any kind of remark you feel like making, and doesn't minimize the impact it's going to have on who you make it about. And I realized that had we been on the air and had we been talking about somebody else, and had somebody else said that about something they said, we would have made horrible fun of them. So, but I did think it was important, whether I'd been fired or not, to meet with the team and to tell them a little bit about myself, about what my life had been about, to apologize to them, and to ask them to forgive me. And I don't know if it's melodramatic to describe it as a life-changing experience, but it was pretty close. Because the coach, it lasted about 4 hours. The coach spoke first, about 30 minutes, talked about her father who had been injured in a mine accident, which I had been. And I didn't mention it to the coach that night, but I don't know any of you know the coach or not. A wonderfully interesting, fascinating figure, and moved the entire room to tears with her talk about not only what had happened, but about her life and her and the struggles that she'd endured. And then I spoke. And as I wanted them to know that, what the show was about. It had been, that's what we did. We made fun of people that I had done a lot of good things in my life. And I don't know if you know, but sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you can, like in an argument with your spouse or something, you hear yourself talking and you realize how foolish you sound. And as I was talking to these young women, I realized that it was, other than placing in context for them who I was and that I wasn't some vicious racist, and that this was this is what we did for a living, to make fun of people, that was so irrelevant to how they felt. It sounded to me, as I listened to myself talk and as I looked at them, it sounded like just one lame excuse after another. That I'd done this for autism, that I'd done this for kids with cancer. Well, that's wonderful. We're happy you're a swell person. But don't say stuff like this about us that is reprehensible, that is not true, that humiliates us, and it places us in the eye of this hideous storm that we neither deserve nor ask for. And they each said that in the next 3 hours. And I think the reason they accepted my apology is because I was able to place in context who I was. But more importantly, they didn't think that I was saying they were prostitutes. But they didn't think it was funny either. And they don't think it's funny when I say it. And they don't think it's funny when D.L. Huey says it or Damon Winans. I mean, I appreciate both of those wonderful comedians trying to place in context the hypocrisy of how come they can say it and I can't, when the truth is none of us should say it. And they should go talk to those young women at Rutgers if they want to know how they feel about it, because they don't think it's funny. And I thought, as we were sitting there listening to them, and some of their parents were there and their grandparents, one mother was this far from my face, screaming, and you could feel her heartbreak. And I was thinking, it sounds stupid, but how fortunate it was that I had been fired. Because had I been there talking to them and apologizing to them and offering them these excuses, and still had my job, that's what they would have thought. They would have thought that I was there to try to save my job. And that might have been true. But I was there to try to save my life. I'd already lost my job. And so they forgave me. They accepted my apology, and they said that they would never forget. And I said that I would never forget. And I analogized it to being an alcoholic and a drug addict, which I also am. If you get into recovery, as I am, for 20-some years now, you have the opportunity to be a better person, to have a better life than you ordinarily would have had. And that's true in this situation. Because that it was demonstrated to these young women that there are consequences for things you say. Would I rather have not gone through it and had them go through it? Absolutely. But as I said at the beginning of these few minutes, I think things worked out the way they should have worked out. We now have the opportunity to have a better program, to obviously diversify the cast. I mean, that just makes sense. But the program is not going to change. We're just not going... It was a great radio program. It's on a better radio station, one of the great iconic radio stations in the history of broadcasting, WABC in New York. I mean, you couldn't make that up. And as you know, I have a special place in my heart, Charles and I, for RFD TV, which already in 30 million homes, and if y'all don't have it on your cable system, you call them, tell them you want it. But so I will never say anything in my lifetime that will make any of these young women at Rutgers regret or feel foolish that they accepted my apology and forgave me. And no one else will say anything on my program that will make anybody think that I didn't deserve a second chance. And in a way, we all, the women at Rutgers and me and the folks on this program, get the opportunity to demonstrate to them and to everybody else that we're willing to have an ongoing discussion about race relations in this country. I know the media was talking about, as soon as they could get me out of the room, they were going to have this national dialogue on race relations and the major media and what could and couldn't be said on radio and television. I must have missed that, but I'm willing to have an obligation, and we'll do that the same way we talked about. I know some drove some might be crazy, but when we started talking about autism, nobody knew what the hell we were talking about. Well, when we passed the Combating Autism Act, few people understood, and many were annoyed that I wouldn't shut up about it. When we started talking about the death benefits for soldiers, I mean, it went on for months and months. And there isn't any reason we can't do that, to learn how to talk to one another. And so I pledge that I'll do that. So, and you'll see demonstrated on this program that we'll do that. But other than that, Not much has changed. Dick Cheney is still a war criminal. Hillary Clinton is still Satan. And I'm back on the radio.
His old man was a rebel yeller, bad boy to the bone, he'd say. Can't trust that other feller, he'd judge them by the tone of their skin.